one very quick topic to finish off this series about fractions, and then you will be experts and you will be ready for anything that grade 9 through 12 can throw at you. Well, almost. Is what to do with positive and negative fractions. Okay? And if you're familiar with integers, positive and negative numbers, positive and negative fractions are more or less the same thing. So you could come up with a fraction which has a negative in it for several ways. So you could, for example, just because it got multiplied by a negative number. So we could have 5/7 times -4. Okay? And the way I would do that is I think to myself, okay, every whole number is really a fraction divided by 1. And the way I do it is I do top times top. So the 5 times 4 is 20. Bottom times bottom, 7 times 1 is 7. And this is a positive times a negative. And so the answer to that is a negative. So I can have a negative fraction, that's fine. And remember, I like the improper fraction. I'm not going to do this as, I could do this as 2 6/7, but this way of writing it is not as good because any addition, subtraction, multiplication, division is easier to do with this one than it is to do with the mixed fraction. Okay? It could show up in a question because somebody, it was a word problem and you needed to divide something. So you could have -2 divided by 6. Just shows up as a question. And now you have some interesting options. In fact, this has lots of options. I'm going to take this over here to a new page. -2 divided by 6. However I got that as a question, I wrote it this way. I wrote it with the fraction line instead of the division sign because that's what we do in high school. And now you have options. First and foremost, you should be going, oh, both of those numbers are divisible by 2. So really this should be -1/3. Now remember the very beginning of this series, we said that as far as we're concerned now in high school, fractions and division are the same thing. Okay? So this could just as well, instead of being -1 divided by 3, I could do this in a calculator. So this could be 0.333 repeating, but it was a negative divided by a positive. So really this is going to be -0.33. But that gives you something interesting, which is because the way multiplication and division with positive and negative numbers works is first you do the number part, 1 divided by 3 is 0.33333333, and then you do the sign. A positive, actually, let's recap. A positive times a positive is a positive. A positive times a negative is a negative. A negative times a positive is a negative. And a negative times a negative is a positive, which you can remember is if they are opposite, you get a negative. And if they match, then you get a positive. So same sign gives a positive, opposite signs gives negative. But now the order won't matter because you will get the same answer whether you do -1 divide by 3, because that's 1 divided by 3 and a positive divided by a negative. That is the same answer as 1 divided by -3, because 1 divided by 3 is 0.333 and a positive divided by a negative is a negative. And that is the same as doing 1 divided by 3 and having that be a negative. So this is something that happens with fractions and negatives, is it does not matter whether the negative is up here, down here, or in front. Okay? And so if you said, it's here, but the question would be easier to answer if it was there, you can move it. If it's there and the question would be easier to answer if it was there, you can move it. because there is no difference, right? Whether I plug in on a calculator -1 divided by 3, 1 divided by -3, or 1 divided by 3 and make that number negative with a negative sign, I get the same answer. Okay, so it's a nice time-saving thing. Now, what happens if I have both? What happens if I have -10 over -25? Okay, so I can reduce, divide by 5, divide by 5. So this is -2, I should do this faster, divided by -5, except when I do -2 divided by -5, the answer will be a positive number. So this would be the same as if both of these numbers were positive, right? -2 divided by -5 is positive 0.4. 2 divided by 5, positive 2 divided by positive 5, is also 0.4. So if you have a fraction and both numbers are negative, you can you either have a choice. Sometimes we write it as a scribble, where we just stick in the plus like that, or sometimes you erase. For the purposes of keeping track and showing your work, which we always kind of bug you for, it is better if the negative was there and you show that, oh, I know I can make them positive, just be fine. It's better to do things that add to the work rather than erasing things, because it makes it more clear that you're doing more thinking. But I mean, the answer is the same, and it doesn't really matter. And then you could ask yourself, okay, what would how would that be different from -10 divided by -25? Well, because in this example, it didn't matter where this negative was. Then in this example, it doesn't matter where this negative is. So I could take that negative and put it over here, and then it would be the same thing. So you have this freedom with fractions and negatives to sort of hop them around to where you want. The last thing I will say, just to round out this series, is we keep using this rule where you can divide by the same thing on both sides. And if I go back to where I find it, or you can multiply. But sorry, I've said both sides, that's wrong. You can multiply the top of a fraction and the bottom of a fraction by the same number, and that is always allowed. And I will say it again so it's right. You can divide the top number and the bottom number by the same number, and that is always allowed. So multiplying and dividing, that is a rule really, really important to understand, that rule does not translate to addition and subtraction. So if I have 1 over 2, I am allowed to do times 4 times 4 and get 1 times 4 is 4, 2 times 4 is 8. That's allowed. What I am not allowed to do is and just we'll burn this into your head with a more appropriate color. What I'm not allowed to do is +4 plus 4. Because what happens? That turns into, and this is not an equal sign in real life, don't think that it is. 1 plus 4 is 5, and 2 plus 4 is 9. And if you type this into a calculator, you get 0.5. And if you type this into a calculator, you get 0.5555. So it doesn't really work. The other thing you can't do is you can't subtract. So if I were to do 1 over 2, and still in red because this is not a rule, -4 minus 4, then this would, not equal because it's not a rule. 1 minus 4 is -3. 2 minus 4 is -2. This would be, these minuses would cancel out, except 3 divided by 2 is 1.5. So I have taken, if this were a real rule, you would be able to turn a fraction that is less than 1, it's a half, it's a fraction, and turn it into a number that is bigger than 1, 1.5. So obviously, these are not rules. And it's really, really, really important to remember that, because there are all kinds of places where it looks like, oh, if only that was a rule, my life would be so easy. They are not rules. Okay? But that covers all sort of the prerequisites that you need for most of high school with fractions. So if you come back and rewatch as many times as you like, but hopefully you should be good to go. So on to newer and harder things, and see you soon.